Good evening, listener. Please sit by my fire, get comfortable, relax, and let me ramble through some scary stories I was told were true. Bug Boy by September 26. I'm not particularly fond of the word bug. It's the kind of word you use to describe something that bothers you, something that irritates you. These so-called bugs that everyone seems to hate have been nothing but delightful to me. I love nothing more than the nightly visits from critters that slip through the windows that I forgot to close. Sometimes I would find families of ladybugs huddled up together in the blinds, or a daddy longlegs making the trek across my wall siding. I would always make sure to leave some crumbs out for these creatures. After all, the insects needed food just as much as I did. As you might have imagined, I was never the most popular kid in school. If anything, I was probably quite the opposite. It seemed like my very presence in a room warranted strange, disdainful looks from everyone in it. "That's the kid that sprinkles food out for bugs," they would whisper amongst each other. "Yesterday I saw him building a house for ants." Nonetheless, my work had to continue. I would sprinkle more and more crumbs and leftovers into the grass, sometimes tossing sugar cubes out into the forest for a lucky ant colony to find. The thought of a little happy ant family in their little tunnels, feasting on some tasty grains of sugar, warmed my heart more than my bullies discouraged me. To this day I have never been stung by a bee or wasp, or bitten by an ant or spider. If you treat them right, they respond in kind. During recess in my last year of middle school, people started to take exception to my hobbies. "Hey, Bug Boy, come here," a boy called out to me. People didn't usually talk to me unless they had insults prepared. Curious, I followed him to the back of the building, where he had his friends waiting. They grabbed my arms and restrained me, pushing me to the ground violently, and pressing my face deep into a mudded puddle. "Watch this," he exclaimed, showing me a wounded grasshopper between his index finger and thumb. "No!" I blurted out, gasping for air. My nose was just barely above the mud, enough for me to breathe. The boy, who his friends called Matt, pinched the grasshopper as hard as he could. The grasshopper's inside spilled out all over his fingers, and he laughed. When I tried to get free of the two kids holding me back, Matt kicked me in the stomach, leaving me out of breath and curled up on the blacktop. He and his friends laughed, cracking jokes and walking away, but not before warning me not to feed the bugs anymore. Nobody would believe me. The only witnesses were Matt and his friends, and it was their word against mine. I had no intention of ratting them out, but I was mad. A moth landed on my knee as I caught my breath. It looked on mournfully at the defiled grasshopper and fluttered away. I slipped my hands into my pockets and offered the forest the rest of my crumbs and sugar cubes. The next day during recess, Matt and his gang showed up again. "Why don't we take a walk?" he asked, having his friends take hold of my arms. He brought me out behind the school. Even further, he brought me into the woods, behind several trees, where no one would be listening. "It's lunchtime," he whispered, the rest of the group chuckling at the remark. He showed me a plastic container of cockroaches and beetles, and removed the lid. They looked malnourished, mistreated. "Eat up, bug boy," he exclaimed, pressing the container closer to my face. Before I could object, I heard Matt yelp and saw him drop the container. He had a swollen red spot on the side of his neck. Within moments he had another one on his cheek, and several on his forehead. He swatted at the wasps circling his face, but it was no use. Matt tried to yell out for help. That only invited the wasps into his mouth and nose. The group watched in horror as he fell to the ground. Fire ants began to crawl into every opening in his clothes, and a small cloud of yellow jackets and wasps were biting and stinging every patch of skin they could find. He started to convulse and twitch, his every breath inviting more insects into his open mouth and down his throat. After a minute of spasmic, jerking movements, he was limp. My horror turned into delight. The boys that held my arms sprinted off to the recess yard, screaming for help. Unfortunately for them, they could not run faster than the wasps could fly. My neighbour's just a giant spider in a trench coat. "Bye," he said adverbsely. My neighbour's just a giant spider in a trench coat. Not giant like those foot-long ones in South America. I mean he's 6 foot tall, standing on his hind legs. I think he thinks he's getting away with a ruse too, but he's so bad at it. It'd be one thing if he wore a mask of human skin or something, or even more clothes under the trench coat. To be fair, sometimes he wears a hat too, but he's not putting anywhere near enough effort into his disguise to warrant the level of confidence he possesses. And he forgets the basics. Like the other day I passed him in the hall and we waved at each other. He waved at me with 3 of his legs. We both stopped when it happened. We turned around and looked into each other's eyes for a moment. I stared into those 8 eyes, wondering if I should finally say something. He waved at me again, this time with 1 leg. I nodded and moved on. I looked back at him though, and he used one of his legs to wipe his forehead, like in mock relief that he didn't get caught. Everyone's way too nice to him, not only in person, that I get, because you're terrified he'll wrap you in webbing and slowly devour you. But we're friends on Facebook, and everyone is always so fucking nice to the guy. He posts the most basic shit you've ever seen, like a picture of several of his legs stretched out on a beach chair, holding a beer, and it'll say #blessed. And people comment, "Wish I was there," or "Save one for me." I came so close to writing, "You're a giant spider. Can your body even process alcohol? Spiders don't have livers." But I stopped myself. We have a few mutual friends in the building, and I didn't want to be that guy who's always causing drama. I'm getting all worked up writing about it though. I'm going to talk to him about it. Not be a dick. Be like, "Hey, I know you're a giant spider. Stop pretending you're not." I'm going to do it now. So, I knocked on his door, and he answered wearing a bathrobe, which is, I guess, what he wears when he's home. I asked if we could talk in private, indicating that I wanted to come in, but he shooed me back, not wanting me to come inside. The door was only open a crack. "You're a giant spider," I whispered. "It's like really obvious too." He stared at me for a moment, then invited me into his place. I wish I hadn't gone in. I wish I'd kept my stupid mouth shut. His apartment was covered in web. It stretched everywhere, in all directions. But that's not all that was there. Taking up the bulk of the space was a gargantuan spider. She had to be over 20 feet wide, and she made no pretense at being human. She gazed at me as I entered their apartment. A substance dripped from her fangs as my steps caused web to vibrate throughout the space. My eyes searched around, not wanting to look at her. A wedding picture of the two of them hung on one of the walls. I looked back to the spider in the bathrobe. "Oh, this must be your lovely wife you're always talking about," I said. "It's so nice to finally meet you." I moved back towards the door. "You know, it's getting late. I'm not sure if I do have time for a beer after all. Maybe some other time?" The spider in the bathrobe led me by him, let me go back out of the door. Before he closed it, he waved goodbye to me with 3 legs. I was bitten by a bug today at lunch. By Cyan Calvin. Today, during our school's lunch break, I was bitten by a strange bug on my arm. The bite felt like a small, stinging needle, with pain that lingered for about a minute afterward. The bug itself was not one I could recognize, but it looked like a giant flying ant with small legs and big wings. After it bit me, a small swelling began to develop on my arms, looking similar to a mosquito bite. My friend who was with me at the time suggested I go to the office, but I have low self-esteem, so I said that I didn't want to bother them. So I made a false promise to go to the office next period. By 4th period, the itching started. It felt like several small insects were crawling through my skin. Small red bumps started to pop up all over my skin, my joints specifically. Though faint, they were still able to coax concerning questions out of my classmates. When no one was looking, I silently but desperately clawed at my skin, and occasionally broke some dots, which drew blood. I quickly wiped away the blood, but within 5 minutes, more dots appeared where the blood once was. By the time last period rolled around, my entire arms and most of my legs were plagued with red cysts that were slowly increasing in size. The itching had gotten significantly worse, and I could feel a stronger sense of something burrowing under my skin. Luckily, my teacher saw me, a 13-year-old boy, doused in red cysts, and she sent me to the office with a shaky voice. My mother picked me up 10 minutes later, and I felt a cyst burst as she embraced me. We were driving home, and as she slammed on the brakes, a particularly large cyst burst, and tiny black worms flew all around the back seat of the car. I cringed, but stayed quiet. When we got home, dots were starting to appear on my torso, neck, and stomach. The itching was almost unbearable, and the second we got home, I drew a scalding hot bath. Relaxation turned to horror as the pristine water slowly clouded with blood and more black worms. I screamed and accidentally slammed my neck into the tap, bursting more cysts. I tussled with a towel and stumbled back to my room, wrestling clothing onto my beaten body. That's when I decided to document this. It's currently 8:28 p.m, and my joints are starting to buckle, and cysts are popping up all over my face. I think I'll have to go to the hospital, and I'm terrified of what's happening to me. But worst of all, some of my friends have called me to tell the teacher that they can't go to school tomorrow because of the chicken pox. I just looked at my mom and my little brother, and I spotted a few tiny red spots on their hands. Oh my God. My town is being infested by strange bees. By Writer. If there's one thing I hate in the summer, it's insects. I don't know why, but when it is hot, our small town is flooded by all sorts of creepy crawlies. It could be because of the various lakes nearby, or that our town is nestled between thick forests. Every summer things are bad, but this year's heatwave made it even worse. Flies and mosquitoes were swarming my house almost since the beginning of July. Every time I'd open a window, you could bet that half a dozen of them made their way inside. Don't even get me started on the spiders. Worst of all were the bees. I don't know where they all came from, but for a month now they're plaguing our town. During the first week, no one was worried about it. Most people guessed that the heat had sped up the breeding process, but soon enough their numbers would thin out. Instead, more of them started appearing. It wasn't long before bee stings became a common occurrence when going outside. Stranger even was that a second, different type of bee appeared. They had bigger bodies that were a bit too long, and were much more aggressive than regular bees. At first people thought they were hornets or wasps, but that wasn't the case. They were some type of local mutation. Things got especially dangerous at the local nursing home, or kindergarten. The elderly and the little kids were too slow to notice the bees, and many of them got stung. Insect spray became as common as bread and water in our town due to those aggressive bees. Even I got a can. 2 weeks ago this epidemic claimed its first victim. It was a middle-aged woman who went out running. When her husband protested, she disregarded the warning and said she'd be fine. Her body was found on the same day. A local farmer found it in a ditch near a hiking trail early in the evening. No one knew what had happened. When the man approached the body, it was teeming with bees. Her face and arms were covered in bee stings, and almost swollen beyond recognition. When my friend Robert went missing, I was worried instantly. He was precisely the type who'd ignore the warnings and the danger. His girlfriend Sue called me Saturday morning. She had not heard from him since Friday afternoon. This wasn't like him at all, she said. With all those bees around, only God knew what had happened. I calmed her down and told her he was most likely busy playing some new video game. Once I hung up, I tried to call Robert. No one answered. I dropped him a message on WhatsApp, and saw that he had not been online since yesterday. That really wasn't like him. He was the type who was online constantly. I drove to his place right away. I rang the doorbell a few times but got no answer. His neighbour soon called out to me and told me he had not seen my friend all day. The last he had seen him was yesterday. I felt a lump in my throat. I asked the old man if he could have a look out and call me if he saw my friend come home. He was friendly enough and said he'd give me a call. Back at home, I had no idea what to do. I was about to call the cops, but what should I tell them? Robert had been out drinking with friends all night for all I knew. He'd probably drop me a WhatsApp message soon enough asking what I was so worried about. 2 hours later, I got a call from his neighbour. The old man told me Robert had come home. His clothes were dirty though, and he looked scruffy and exhausted. Robert didn't even react when the old man called out to him. He went inside without saying a word. I was so glad to hear he was alright. I tried calling him, but again I couldn't reach him. My messages stayed unread too. Shit. What if something had happened and he'd passed out? When I arrived, it took Robert a little while, but he opened the door. He didn't say a word, and stood there staring at me. "Hey man, you alright? I was worried about you." He just kept staring at me. For a moment he opened his mouth as if to say something, only to quickly close it again. Finally he stepped aside to let me in. As I walked past him I noticed how bad he smelled. "Dude, what the hell did you do last night? You should take a shower or something." No reaction. Robert quietly closed the front door and walked straight towards the living room. Something was off about the way he moved. He seemed to take a short pause before each step, as if to think about it. His feet shuffled over the floor and looked as if he dragged his body forward. Why was he so exhausted? "Dude, are you sure you're alright?" I asked as I followed him. Instead of answering, he sat down on his couch and kept staring at me. I was about to call him out on his behaviour when I heard the buzzing of bees. I couldn't say where it was coming from and started scanning the room. I was sick and tired of the damned bees by now. I'd gotten so many bee stings that I killed them on sight. I couldn't see any though. I suddenly felt a stinging pain on my arm and noticed that one of the weirder, bigger bees had stung me. There was already another one coming towards me. Where the hell were they coming from? It sat down on my arm, and for a moment it seemed as if it were looking straight into my eyes. That was it. I got out the can from my backpack and started to spray it. I wouldn't let it sting me too. At this moment, Robert started to squeak. It was this weird high-pitched sound, and in surprise I turned towards him. He'd gotten up from his seat. "Dude, what's..." I broke up because he came tumbling towards me and crashed his body into mine with full force. "What the fuck is going on with you? Calm down, man." His answer was more of the angry squeaking. He started to push me to the ground, and in that instant I heard the buzzing of the bees again. It was even louder this time, but I still couldn't see them. Where the hell was it coming from? "Dude, stop! Enough with this!" I said as I pushed him off me. Before I could get up, he came at me again. By now I had had enough of this, and pushed him back hard with both hands. There was this sickening, wet sound of something breaking. Then Robert fell backward to the ground. "Oh shit, man! Are you alright? I didn't mean to..." There was the buzzing sound again, this time loud enough to drown out my voice. This time I knew where it was coming from. It was from inside my friend. I watched in horror as a swarm of bees burst from his open mouth and flew straight at me. I screamed and started to spray them, but there were too many. It must have been dozens of them. They were all around me. I felt countless bee stings all over my arms and the back of my neck. In my fury I used the spray almost at random, spraying everywhere. The air in Robert's small living room became heavy with insecticides in a matter of minutes. As I fought the bees, I saw Robert's body shake and tremble as if he were suffering a stroke. He was squeaking again, tried to run from the room, but crashed straight into the wall. I saw more and more of the bees crawl from his collapsed body only to die right on the spot. I tore myself from the sight and ran outside. I collapsed on the grass, coughing and swaying at the last bees that still stuck to my body. Soon the police arrived. Robert's neighbour must have heard our fight and got worried. I told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. While they interrogated me, an ambulance was called. As they treated my many bee stings, one of the police officers approached me. He was clearly disturbed by what he had seen. He told me my friend was dead. When I started freaking out, he assured me it wasn't due to our fight or the insect spray. No, he said. My friend must have been dead for a while. This made no sense. I told the man again that my friend had only come home an hour or two ago. The man nodded, but the paramedics had said that Robert's body was in a state of advanced decay. There was no doubt that he had been dead for almost a day. When I gave my testimony at the station the next day, I learned more about the whole thing. The police officer opposite me frowned once I'd finished my story. He said he'd typically stay quiet about these things, but what they'd found during the autopsy was just too weird. My friend's head, as well as his body, was covered in holes and tunnels. It looked almost like the honeycombs in a beehive. It was clear that Robert had died on Friday afternoon, near the forest, the man said. The strange bees must have then started to convert his body into a hive. No one could explain how he made his way home, though. It's now a week later, but there's one thing I can't stop thinking about. What if it was those bees? What if they dug into his body to control him and moved their new hive here, right into the middle of our small town? Can't sleep. Bye. Because I said so too. Last night I watched a handful of haggard-looking announcers on CNN sit around a table discussing the recent paper published by the National Sleep Foundation, confirming the rumours that had already been circulating online about recent discoveries about the nature of consciousness and what happens to us while we're sleeping. You could see the bags under their eyes, even under their makeup. I think I saw a few spelling errors in the news scroll as well, which was reporting on the recent dramatic rise in suicides, homicides and mass shootings, attributed to heightened social anxiety, and of course the sudden worldwide rash of accidents, cars, trucks and planes, all attributed to operator error. The operators, as well as the news announcers, aren't quite operating at peak efficiency as of late, and it's very late. All due to the paper and the claims it irrefutably confirms, which everyone's really tired of hearing about. Everyone's really tired in general, actually. The sleep study revealed that while sleeping we experience a complete cessation of self. Awareness ends, consciousness reboots, and the new awareness accesses the memories stored in the mind. Sounds ominous, right? But a little confusing. Here it is in simpler terms. That part of you that's you, the voice reading this now. That part of you that thinks of itself as me, myself, and I. That part ends. That part dies. Basically, we live a day, die at night, and each morning a blank idiot awareness is born, and in those first few moments of awakening, it accesses our memories and convinces itself it's us. It's death, for everyone, every night. The person who wakes up tomorrow is a different person from the one who fell asleep the night before, and it's borrowing memories it didn't experience, and an identity that doesn't belong to it, and it'll only live for a day, or maybe longer if it can stay awake, and there are ways to stay awake. But people and things start getting strange if you stay awake too long. The paper was published about 3 days ago, give or take some sleepless hours, and most aren't handling it well. As I type this, I can hear screams coming from the apartments next door, and perhaps crazed laughter too, and there are things burning in the streets below, things I don't want to examine too closely. Pleasant dreams. Well, I'm done rambling for now, listener. Wasn't that fun? I hope our writers survive their encounters, so they can tell me more of their tales, and I can ramble through them with you. Good night, listener, and do take care, because you never know what's out there.